A police officer humiliates a black woman in the street, but a few minutes later he is already in handcuffs. He was shouting at her in front of witnesses, without knowing who she really was. This was supposed to be his victory, but she just pulled out her badge and turned the game around. Post in the comments where are you watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the latest stories. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a bustling mid-sized American city, the cadence of everyday life masked hidden agendas and secret operations. Under the warm, hazy glow of the late afternoon sun, the busy sidewalk near a busy intersection bore testament to the city's rhythm. People hurried along the pavement, engrossed in their own routines, unaware that history was about to unfold on these familiar streets. Amelia Thompson blended seamlessly with the crowd. Clad in a simple yet elegant navy blouse and black trousers, her look was impeccable in its understatement. To the casual observer, she was just another professional en route to an important meeting. But beneath that quiet exterior lay a resolve as unwavering as steel. Amelia was not merely a woman on her way to work. She was an undercover FBI agent with a critical mission. That day, she was headed to meet an informant who held key evidence in an investigation that threatened to expose a dangerous web of corruption reaching deep into the fabrics of the state's power structure. The plan was precise: remain inconspicuous until she could secure the evidence and extract valuable intelligence. Amelia knew that the relevance of information in an investigation was measured in seconds, and every moment of discretion was crucial. Even a single word or gesture could jeopardize the entire mission. Her calm, controlled demeanor was meticulously honed through years of training and tough assignments. Yet, she also knew that being true to her principles meant she must never compromise her dignity, even if it meant swallowing personal indignation for the sake of the larger goal. As she neared a zebra crossing at an intersection notorious for its heavy pedestrian traffic, Amelia mentally rehearsed the details of her meeting. Her informant's message had been succinct and urgent. Come to 5th and Main at 3:15. Come alone. It was a coded instruction that only a select few within the agency would understand. The informant was a whistleblower whose bravery and desperation had helped unravel layers of corruption. Amelia's mind churned with both anticipation and caution. The stakes were high, and the possibility of unexpected disruptions, however remote, was something she had learned to expect. As she stepped off the curb and began her slow, measured walk toward the crosswalk, her internal focus was unyielding. It was then that the unexpected occurred. A police cruiser, its aura of authority unmistakable in its polished black and white livery, slowed abruptly alongside her. From the front window, a stern-faced local officer stepped out. Officer Michael Reynolds, a veteran of the city's police force, strutted toward her with a gait that spoke of entitlement and an unwavering belief in his own power. His uniform, crisp and adorned with badges, contrasted sharply with Amelia's civilian attire, making him appear as if he commanded an undisputed domain of the streets. "Hold it right there," Officer Reynolds barked, his voice cold and commanding as he intercepted her at the crosswalk. His hand shot out, roughly seizing her forearm before she could register what was happening. His eyes, hardened by years of routine policing in neighborhoods, he considered his jurisdiction, scanned her face with a glance that betrayed an instant judgment. "License and registration," he ordered brusquely, his tone laced with an air of superiority. There was a fleeting pause as if he expected her to fumble for documents in evident disapproval. "You know the drill, miss," he added, his words dripping with condescension. He didn't give her the opportunity to speak, his gaze already dismissing the possibility that this might be a misunderstanding of any kind. His attitude was rough, uncouth in a way that suggested he valued his authority above any consideration for respect or decorum. Inside, Amelia experienced a ripple of controlled annoyance. Every instinct in her body told her to respond, but she understood perfectly well that the success of her mission depended on her remaining incognito. Revealing even the slightest hint of her true identity now would jeopardize the meeting and potentially endanger the investigation. The police officer's tone hinted at racial prejudice, a subtle reminder of a reality that even in this day and age, many African Americans faced disdain and condescension from those in uniform. Yet, Amelia's focus was razor-sharp. Her mind was already weighing her limited options. "Officer Reynolds," she replied in a quiet, measured tone, maintaining her composure despite the humiliation seeping into every fiber of her being. "I'm afraid I don't have any documents on me right now." Her voice, though soft, carried an undeniable firmness. There was a brief flicker in her eyes, a hidden storm of restraint, and in that moment, she decided to say nothing more. Silence, she knew, would be her ally. The undercover assignment demanded that she never reveal her true self or the sensitive nature of her work, no matter how provocative the situation became. Reynolds' face contorted into a sneer at her reply. "That's not acceptable," he spat. "Everyone is required to show proper identification when stopped by an officer. You must have some form of ID." His tone was aggressive, each word a reminder of his misplaced entitlement to humiliate her publicly. His grip on her arm tightened imperceptibly, and his eyes roved over her features with unwarranted scrutiny. The very setting, a busy intersection where bystanders began to notice the interaction, turned the mundane act of document checking into a public spectacle. Onlookers exchanged uneasy glances, some frowning at the apparent overreach of authority. Amelia's heart pounded noticeably in the tight confines of her chest, yet she maintained her silence. There was a calmness in her eyes that did nothing to betray the internal tension. She knew that to engage verbally would risk her cover. Instead, she inwardly calculated her next steps. The seconds stretched endlessly, filled with the heavy hum of ambient city noises and the murmurs of approaching pedestrians. Each passing moment reinforced her silent resolve. Conceal her identity until the precise moment when her true authority could be unveiled, without jeopardizing the investigation. Officer Reynolds barked another order, his tones slicing through the air. "You're not going anywhere until you produce some ID." His language was crude, laden with assumptions about who she was meant to be, never once considering that perhaps the woman he was confronting had layers he was not privy to. Yet, to Reynolds, she was simply an inconvenient obstacle, an unknown figure who dared not speak under his authority. As the tension grew on that ordinary city street, Amelia realized that she must mentally prepare for the potential escalation of this confrontation. She was acutely aware that if she allowed this episode to spiral out of control now, it might jeopardize not only the upcoming meeting with her informant but also the broader investigation that demanded utmost secrecy. The collision of her covert mission with Reynolds' overt display of authority was an unpredictable variable, a curveball thrown into a meticulously planned operation. Unbeknownst to Officer Reynolds, every calculated heartbeat of Amelia's was a silent testimony to years of training and discipline. As bystanders continued to watch with bated breath, the stage had been set for a confrontation that would ultimately test the boundaries of authority, racism, and personal dignity. For Amelia, every second was a careful balance. Maintain the guise of an unsuspecting civilian while preserving the integrity of an FBI investigation that had far-reaching implications. In that charged moment at the pedestrian crossing, with the hum of the city playing backdrop to her silent defiance, the seeds were sown for what would become one of the most consequential events in her career. The encounter was not mere happenstance. It was the first spark that would ignite a blaze of public scrutiny, internal investigations, and, ultimately, a nationwide reckoning. For now, however, Amelia held her silence, her eyes locked on the pavement ahead, every nerve attuned to the unfolding drama. And as the world around her moved in slow motion, the story of one determined undercover agent and a callous display of power was just beginning to write itself into the annals of a city desperate for change. At the crowded crosswalk, with the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement, the confrontation escalated. Officer Reynolds, his expression a mixture of entitlement and disdain, stood unyielding as he glared down at Amelia. His grip on her forearm remained firm and unrelenting, his eyes scanning her face as if weighing her worth based solely on appearance. Every word he uttered cut through the ambient noise of the busy street like a practiced weapon. "Miss, I've told you already. You need to produce your identification immediately," Reynolds barked, his tone booming over the murmurs of passing pedestrians. His voice carried an unmistakable roughness, hinting at years of entitlement and unchecked power. He leaned in so close that Amelia could feel the heat of his breath. "Don't give me that act. You're not in a position to decide how this stop goes." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest, but she maintained her composure. Inside, the storm of emotions raged, a potent mix of indignation, hurt, and steely resolve. But she chose silence over confrontation. Every moment of quiet fortitude was essential. Her undercover role demanded that she display no sign of internal turmoil. The stakes were too high. One wrong word and the entire investigation would be compromised. As the officer's attention shifted downwards, scanning her modest attire, her carefully styled hair, the hint of exhaustion in her eyes, he began to sneer, his words growing increasingly insulting. "What, you think you're above the law just because you're dressed all pretty like that? I've seen plenty of folks in fine clothes trying to weasel their way out of following simple rules. Where's your license? Your ID? What are you hiding?" His words were laced with an unspoken assumption that she did not belong in that place, that she was inferior. Every syllable dripped with condescension and an attitude that bordered on overt racial arrogance. Onlookers began to take notice. A circle of puzzled pedestrians and nearby shopkeepers gathered at a discreet distance, their eyes flicking between the officer and the calm, silent figure of Amelia. Some of them exchanged uncertain glances, while others murmured comments that hinted at disapproval of the officer's heavy-handed approach. However, most simply watched, caught between the impulses to intervene and to avoid drawing further attention to a situation that, at first glance, appeared to be a routine traffic stop. Amelia's mind raced. Years of training had prepared her for these moments. Moments when dignity was tested and the burden of silence was nearly too heavy to bear. She felt the sting of humiliation not only through Reynolds' harsh words but in the unwanted attention of an indifferent crowd. Yet she also felt the weight of her mission pressing upon her. Every second of delay, every instance of lost composure, risked exposing her true identity as an FBI agent working undercover. The evidence in her possession was critical, and the informant was waiting. Failure was not an option. Officer Reynolds, oblivious to the internal battle waging within her, continued his tirade. "I don't care if you're in a hurry or if you think you're special. Everyone must show identification when stopped. It's the law, and you're not exempt, even if you're one of those professional types who like to dress up." His voice rose, attracting the attention of more onlookers, and even a few nearby store clerks who glanced nervously in their direction. The officer's tone was harsh and predatory, each word deliberately designed to shame her in front of everyone. Amelia, clutching her silent resignation, did nothing more than offer a slight, measured shake of her head. Her eyes, dark with a mix of anger and sorrow, remained fixed straight ahead as if daring him to break her calm. Each passing second felt like an eternity. The air around her seemed to thicken with the weight of public humiliation. Every footstep resonated with the echoes of his insults, and every whispered remark from the onlookers felt like another nail in her sense of indignity. "Are you even capable of answering a simple question?" Reynolds jeered, his face flushing with frustration as he continued. "I'm not asking for a favor here. I'm exercising my authority." His posture was uncompromising. He towered over her, his voice echoing off nearby buildings. "If you have nothing to show me, then you must be hiding something. And trust me, that kind of attitude won't get you out of here." His words left little room for misunderstanding. He was both questioning her credibility and asserting his dominance in what he plainly believed was an easy situation. Inside, Amelia's resolve remained unbroken. Her pulse throbbed in silent protest as she closed her eyes for a brief moment, summoning the discipline ingrained in her from endless hours of training, countless previous encounters, and the personal conviction that the mission, above all else, was paramount. She recalled her briefing that morning, every instruction to not let emotions cloud her judgment. Yet, the palpable sting of injustice, magnified by the officer's palpable racist insinuations, pricked at her core. She maintained her silence, each second a calculated defiance. Her inner thoughts were a mosaic of strategies and contingencies. The necessity to preserve her cover, the implications if Reynolds persisted with further harassment, the impact this incident might have on bystanders if not handled properly. She weighed the potential outcomes like a seasoned chess player choosing the right move, knowing that any misstep could jeopardize the entire operation. The tension on the sidewalk mounted as Reynolds' irritation grew. His voice took on an even more imperious tone. "I'm not asking for your preference on this matter. Show me your ID right now." His eyes, still narrowed in disdain, pierced through her, waiting for a reaction. Any sign of defiance or vulnerability that he could exploit. A small cluster of onlookers edged nearer, their collective curiosity blending with concern. Among them, a few faces showed obvious dismay, and one or two individuals exchanged whispers that painted Reynolds' tactics as unprofessional, perhaps even wrong. However, the majority seemed frozen in a state of reluctant observation, paralyzed by the spectacle of authority being exercised in such an unyielding manner. Amelia knew that if she allowed herself to react emotionally, if she let anger spill forth in response to his degrading words, it would not only risk blowing her cover, but also embolden Reynolds further. The possibility of escalating the situation into a physical confrontation, or even attracting unwanted media attention at this crucial juncture, loomed dangerous and real. She narrowed her eyes, taking a slow, silent breath. Her jaw tightened in a gesture of resolve that went unseen by the indifferent crowd but was etched into her very being. For what felt like minutes, the standoff between Amelia and Officer Reynolds continued. His demand hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Every nerve in her body screamed to shout back, to tell him to back off, to protest the humiliation publicly. But Amelia knew that the mission required her to keep her composure at all costs. The truth she harbored, her identity, and the integrity of the investigation rested on her unwavering silence, even when faced with blatant disrespect and prejudice. As the confrontation drew out, the sounds of the city, the distant rumble of traffic, murmurs from the gathering spectators, and the faint honks of impatient drivers, seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment. Amelia's thoughts were a whirlwind of calculated risks and steely determination. The time was coming, she knew, when she would have to reveal her true credentials to flip the power dynamic. But that moment was still to come. For now, she clung to her silence like a shield, internalizing her pain and deferring her response until it could be used judiciously to safeguard her mission. In that tense, breathless interlude on a city sidewalk, the seeds of a much larger reckoning were being sown. What initially appeared to be a simple, albeit abrasive, interaction between a local cop and a pedestrian was now becoming something far more consequential. Amelia's restrained dignity, in the face of public humiliation, was setting the stage for events that would soon draw the scrutiny of a nation. The silent defiance of an undercover agent in the midst of everyday prejudice was a quiet call to arms, a statement that integrity, when preserved under fire, could eventually reshape the narrative. And so, with every second that passed on that busy crosswalk, the tension thickened. Officer Reynolds' crude demands and boorish behavior continued unabated, but they were met with nothing more than Amelia's unyielding, measured calm. The crowd bore witness to this silent battle, a struggle of wills where dignity was challenged head-on, yet remained resolutely intact. Unbeknownst to Reynolds, this encounter held the promise of a dramatic reversal. For beneath her quiet exterior, Amelia was not just a woman enduring public humiliation. She was an agent of change, gathering the strength to turn this debacle into an opportunity to expose deeper truths about abuse of power and systemic discrimination. The tense standoff at the crosswalk continued as the busy urban hum melded with the murmurs of growing discomfort among the gathering crowd. In that charged moment, as Amelia Thompson, an undercover FBI agent working incognito, stood with unyielding composure, several pedestrians began to take notice. At first, a few onlookers simply watched with furrowed brows, but soon a palpable shift occurred. Smartphones were lifted, and the click of recording apps filled the air, capturing every detail of the unfolding confrontation. A young man in a worn leather jacket was among the first to press record. His eyes, wide with disbelief, flicked from Officer Reynolds' aggressive posture to Amelia's remarkably calm yet determined face. Neighbors, office workers, and even a few elderly couples paused on the sidewalk, compelled to witness what was clearly far from a routine police stop. The atmosphere, once ordinary and brisk, now crackled with an unexpected tension as voices in the background began to murmur in hushed disapproval. "Hey, officer," one of the bystanders called out timidly, breaking the silence with an undercurrent of solidarity. "Aren't you supposed to treat people respectfully?" That question, directed at Reynolds, seemed to ripple through the throng. Others joined in, expressing concern over the public display of authority being wielded without restraint. The air, heavy with the collective gaze of the community, now bore witness to not only a confrontation of individuals but also a larger commentary on the abuse of power. Officer Reynolds, whose demeanor had been steely and unyielding minutes earlier, now appeared increasingly agitated by the growing scrutiny. His eyes, previously fixed on enforcing compliance, darted around at the recording devices as if suddenly aware that his conduct was on public display. His voice, still aggressive, took on a new edge as he barked, "Back off, all of you. This is none of your business." His tone escalated into a threatening timbre, the kind that hinted at the possibility of physical enforcement if the situation did not proceed under his strict commands. A tall, middle-aged man, wearing a faded baseball cap and a concerned expression, stepped forward from the circle of onlookers. "Sir, calm down," he pleaded, clearly disturbed by Reynolds's rising anger. "You're overreacting. Everyone here is just trying to help ensure things are done right." But his words seemed to fuel Reynolds further. With a scoffing gesture, the officer waved him off dismissively, his eyes narrowing. "I don't need a crowd of vigilantes telling me how to do my job," he snapped, his voice echoing off nearby storefronts. The threat of force in his tone was unmistakable, a warning not merely to Amelia, but to anyone who dared challenge his authority. Amelia kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, her face an impassive mask of discipline. Internally, she catalogued every nuance of the unfolding scene. Each whispered comment from the onlookers, each flash from a recording phone, was carefully noted within her mind. She knew that the video evidence being gathered at that very moment was critical, for her mission and for holding accountable those who abused their power. The silent, collected resolve in her eyes served as both a shield and a signal. She would not break character, yet justice was already gathering momentum around her. As Reynolds took a step forward, seizing her arm a little tighter, a young woman stepped between them. "Please, officer, let her go," she said, her voice tremulous yet determined. "There's no need for this kind of treatment." Her intercession, though polite, was laced with the fervor of someone who had seen too many instances of overreach. But Reynolds was unmoved. With a threatening glare that swept over the gathered witnesses, he retorted, "I'm not here to take orders from bystanders. If she doesn't have her ID, she's not going anywhere until I get it." His words, harsh and dismissive, further inflamed the crowd, and a murmur of collective outrage surged through those who had grown tired of unchecked authority. In the midst of the escalating tension, a looming figure in the crowd, a teenage boy with a hoodie pulled low over his eyes, continued to record from a short distance. Unbeknownst to Reynolds, this teenager had captured not only the officer's unwarranted brutality, but also subtle exchanges that hinted at deeper patterns of systemic misconduct. His recording, steady and unflinching, was destined to become a key piece of evidence, one that would later unveil similar encounters that had been brushed aside time and again. The confrontation edged dangerously toward a physical climax as Reynolds' frustration began to boil over. "You're testing my patience," he roared, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. He jostled Amelia roughly, and for a brief, fraught second, it appeared that a scuffle might break out. The crowd gasped, and a few people instinctively stepped back as if to avoid the brewing chaos. Yet, even in the face of this looming threat, Amelia's posture remained steadfast, a silent sentinel refusing to be cowed by aggression. A palpable hush fell over the microcosm of onlookers as Reynolds's clenched fist rose, his eyes flicking between the agent and the crowd. The air vibrated with the tension of impending conflict, and every face in the circle focused on the imminent clash of wills. The youth with the camera, his eyes wide and determined, continued to capture every detail. The glint of authority in Reynolds's eyes, the controlled defiance on Amelia's face, and the anxious energy radiating from the gathered witnesses. The scene on that city sidewalk had morphed from a mundane interaction into a microcosm of societal fault lines, one where power, prejudice, and the struggle for dignity converged. Each second of Reynolds's threatening posture and each moment of Amelia's measured silence added to a tapestry of tension that promised more than just a personal altercation. It was a moment witnessed by the public, recorded by modern technology, and destined to become a catalyst for an inquiry into systemic abuses of authority. In that charged moment, as the threat of Reynolds's force loomed ominously, the seeds were being sown for an upheaval that would soon ripple across the city's consciousness. The community, now armed with video evidence and united in silent indignation, was poised to demand accountability. Amelia's unspoken resolve, manifested by her refusal to yield despite the officer's harassing aggression, was not just a personal victory, but a statement of the inevitable exposure of a system long steeped in arrogance and abuse. And so, with the busy street as a stage and countless eyes witnessing every tense heartbeat, the encounter escalated from a simple demand for identification into a confrontation that transcended personal affront. It was a moment charged with the promise of change, a moment that would soon force those in power to answer for their actions. As the truth gathered momentum, unstoppable and undeniable. As the confrontation at the crosswalk escalated and Officer Reynolds' aggressive behavior reached its boiling point, the tension on the city sidewalk became almost unbearable. The officer's sneers and crude threats had already drawn a crowd of onlookers, with smartphones raised and whispers circulating among the witnesses. It was then that Reynolds, in a final act of bluster, stepped too far. His tone, already loaded with disdain, morphed into an overt challenge as he shouted, "I ain't taking any of your attitude, miss. Either produce your ID now or be ready to face consequences." His voice boomed, drowning out even the murmur of the surrounding crowd. In that charged moment, it was clear he aimed not only to assert his authority, but to embarrass and silence her before anyone could question his methods. Amelia's heart drummed in her chest, yet every muscle in her body remained perfectly still. After enduring minutes of relentless verbal abuse without a single word of protest, the result of discipline honed by years of covert assignments and the unyielding need to protect the integrity of her mission, she finally realized that Reynolds had crossed a decisive boundary. When he reached into his utility belt for his baton with threatening haste, something in Amelia snapped into action. Calmly, without raising her voice or betraying a hint of the storm raging beneath her composed exterior, she slowly reached into her purse and, with the deliberateness of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times in her mind, produced her FBI credentials. "Officer Reynolds," Amelia stated evenly, holding up a well-worn but unmistakable badge that bore the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "I'm Agent Amelia Thompson, undercover. I have the clearance to be here, and I'm required by law to proceed with my assignment. I suggest you step back and await your department's internal review on this matter." Her tone was measured, yet the authority in her voice left no room for argument. The words seemed to hang in the air for several heartbeats. Officer Reynolds' face drained of color as he stared at the badge. In that instant, the dynamic shifted from one of blatant abuse of power to a magnificent reversal of roles. The crowd, already recording the episode, now watched with renewed intensity and anticipation. Murmurs rippled through the bystanders, some incredulous, others relieved that the situation might finally be turning in favor of law and order. Before Reynolds could muster a rebuttal, his radio crackled to life with a dispatch call. Moments later, two uniformed officers in plain clothes, their expressions grave and professional, rushed toward the scene. "Officer Reynolds, please stand down," one of them ordered, his voice a calm counterpoint to the earlier hostility. "We are initiating an internal affairs inquiry concerning your conduct." His words, firm yet devoid of the earlier aggression, carried an authority that left no room for further argument. Reynolds, still reeling, fumbled with his radio as a palpable change swept over him. The growing crowd, which had transformed from a faceless mass into a gathering of vigilant citizens, saw the situation taken over by officers whose presence heralded accountability. Amelia's eyes, though still calm and inscrutable, flickered with an inner triumph. In that harrowing instant, every second of discipline and every moment of silent endurance had culminated in a reversal that vindicated her covert operation and highlighted the unchecked abuse of power she had just faced. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said softly. "I'm simply here to do my job and ensure that justice is served." Her words resonated with a quiet strength that reverberated among the onlookers, many of whom began to clap and murmur in support. A bystander, clearly moved, remarked, "Finally, someone stands up to call it like it is." The plainclothed backup quickly moved to detain Reynolds for his excessive use of force and for violating departmental protocols. Officers handcuffed him in view of dozens of witnesses. The spectacle of the arrest sent shockwaves through the immediate vicinity. Witnesses began recording every detail. Parents, shoppers, and passersby exchanged looks that mixed disbelief and approval. The incident, once set to fade as another example of everyday profanity, was now transforming into a major news story before the very eyes of the local community. Yet amid the chaos, Amelia maintained her composure like a beacon of unwavering resolve. She lowered her badge momentarily as if to reassert her civilian cover just enough to continue the operation without blowing her entire cover to the world. In the brief silence that followed Reynolds' handcuffing, she discreetly signaled to a nearby communicator device that her target appointment was still on schedule. Despite the dramatic reversal and the sudden arrival of backup, Amelia's mission was not derailed. The informant was still waiting, a critical element in a case that was rapidly escalating from a local confrontation into a matter of significant public interest. In that charged moment, as the internal affairs officers escorted Reynolds away and the crowd buzzed with the realization that abuse would no longer be tolerated, Amelia felt a swell of justice that transcended her personal ordeal. The incident had now blossomed into a public inquiry that promised accountability and systemic change. What began as a targeted act of humiliation was evolving into a pivotal moment in the ongoing battle against the misuse of authority, a moment that would soon garner attention on a national scale. As exchange and whispers filled the air, Amelia slipped away from the crowd with renewed purpose, her every step measured and deliberate. She merged into the sea of pedestrians, her mind already on the next phase of her operation. The impact of this confrontation was far-reaching. Not only had she safeguarded her investigation, but she had also ignited the spark of accountability in the community. With her covert identity intact and a clear mandate to expose further corruption, Amelia knew that this public moment was only the beginning of a radical transformation, a radical reckoning with the practices of those who wield power without responsibility. No sooner had Agent Amelia Thompson's FBI credentials been brandished than the atmosphere on the busy city sidewalk transformed into chaos. Within moments, plainclothed internal affairs officers swarmed the scene, their faces etched with professional determination. Officer Reynolds, whose earlier bluster had filled the air with arrogant contempt, was now abruptly subdued. His outstretched hand, once a tool of intimidation, was firmly grasped by two officers, and he was forced away from the gathering crowd. The internal affairs team moved methodically, quickly placing him under arrest for excessive force, abuse of power, and violating departmental protocols. They confiscated his radio and baton, and within minutes, Reynolds was cuffed and led away, his protests drowned out by an eruption of collective disapproval from everyone present. As Reynolds was escorted into a waiting, unmarked vehicle, the crowd's reaction intensified. Bystanders, many of whom had recorded the entire incident on their smartphones, began to shout in unison. Voices rose with an emotional cadence that mixed outrage with relief. "This is unacceptable," and "Justice is finally coming." Even as the internal affairs officers maintained order at the scene, a palpable buzz of conversation spread among the onlookers. A teenage boy in a faded hoodie, who had been discreetly recording from a few feet away, looked up with wide eyes as he realized the magnitude of what he had captured. A moment that he knew would carry far beyond the confines of that street. Within minutes, news vans began to pull up along the curb, and local reporters hurried to interview witnesses. The teenager's video, taken in raw clarity from his smartphone, was shared among a cluster of residents, and then circulated online. His recording showed every detail. Reynolds' aggressive posture, the forceful grip that had been applied, the unmistakable moment when Amelia calmly presented her FBI badge, and the ensuing arrival of plain-clothed officers who swiftly turned the tables. As his video spread on social media, its impact exploded beyond the narrow circle of onlookers. In a matter of hours, it became a viral sensation that incited national shock. Social media feeds were soon inundated with comments denouncing the blatant abuse of authority. People from every walk of life chimed in with expressions of solidarity for Amelia and condemnation of the officer's behavior. The incident was dissected frame by frame in live streams and heated discussion groups. Experts weighed in on the misuse of power and racism in local policing. Forums buzzed with analyses of Reynolds' actions, and many recounted similar experiences they or their loved ones had suffered in encounters with law enforcement. The widespread outrage forced local civic leaders and community advocates to demand an immediate and thorough investigation into not only Reynolds' conduct, but also the questionable practices that had emboldened him to treat a civilian woman with such disrespect. Inside the local police department, whispers of this incident began to trigger a broader introspection. Supervisors, alarmed by the rapid circulation of the footage and the resolute public outcry, convened emergency meetings to assess the situation. Policy documents were retrieved, and officers' internal performance records were scrutinized. The Internal Affairs Inquiry, initially meant to be a routine investigation, now took on a broader significance in light of mounting evidence that Reynolds had engaged in repetitive misconduct. The incident, steeped in excessive force and overt discrimination, threatened not only to tarnish the reputation of one cop, but to reveal systemic issues that had long festered beneath the surface. Amelia, meanwhile, watched the unfolding events with quiet satisfaction mingled with the ever-present focus on her undercover mission. Although her cover had been at risk, her measured response and the subsequent reversal of power had set in motion an investigation that could shake the foundations of local policing. She maintained her calm demeanor even as reporters surrounded her, peppering her with questions on the incident. With the practiced precision of a seasoned agent, she answered in carefully rehearsed, if sparse, responses, steering attention back to the misconduct at hand. Her priority remained clear: gather intel from the informant, preserve the investigation's secrecy, and now, amid the public uproar, ensure that accountability was not just a promise but an action soon to be felt throughout the system. The street had turned into an impromptu forum for civic engagement. Local community members, emboldened by the visible sign of accountability in Reynolds' arrest, began organizing on the spot. Small clusters of people huddled together discussing the need for police reform and demanding transparent investigations. Old-timers recounted memories of past abuses, and young parents worried about the safety of their children in a system that often seemed to value dominance over justice. The viral video had lit a spark, and a cascading series of reactions was spreading not just through digital media, but via personal conversations in coffee shops, community centers, and over dinner tables across the city. As the initial shock began to taper into organized protest, city officials announced plans to hold a press conference addressing the abuse of power rooted in this single incident. Various advocacy groups pledged their support for the internal investigation, and the incident was quickly slated to be a focus of broader discussions at council meetings and community watchdog organizations. Public sentiment was clear: there was no longer room for tolerated disregard for individual dignity, especially when institutional power was misused to silence and humiliate. By the end of the afternoon, several major media outlets had picked up the story. Headlines began to appear with language that struck at the heart of law enforcement accountability. Officer arrested in public abuse sparks major inquiry, and viral video exposes systemic racism in local policing. The teenager's video was replayed on network news, its raw footage serving as a stark reminder of the fragility of justice when entrusted to those in power without oversight. Witnesses at the scene found themselves emerging as unexpected advocates for change. One bystander, tearful yet resolute, later told a local reporter, "I've seen this happen before, but never with such clear evidence. Today, I believe something will change because we all stood up." This sentiment, echoed by many, underscored the moment's significance. It was not solely about one officer's fall from grace, but a broader repudiation of abuse entrenched in the system. The collective outrage of the crowd had created a pressure cooker that no institution could easily contain. For Amelia, the confrontation had evolved into something greater than her immediate mission. The public arrest of Reynolds was a turning point, a decisive moment when individual abuse was exposed, and the call for accountability resonated far beyond one encounter. The incident, captured in all its raw intensity by passionate citizens, was just beginning to alter the narrative on policing and systemic discrimination in the city. What had started as a heated, personal altercation was now fueling an investigation destined to reshape not only departmental policies, but also public trust in the law enforcement system. As dusk approached, the echoes of Reynolds's arrest continued to reverberate through the city. Meanwhile, Amelia slipped back into the flow of the urban crowd, blending into the anonymity of the evening, while her inner resolve was further steeled. The encounter on that street had set in motion a chain reaction of accountability and reform that would soon escalate beyond local news, potentially capturing the attention of state-level policymakers and even federal oversight committees. The fall of Officer Reynolds, as documented meticulously by countless cameras and witnessed by a multitude of eyes, was a powerful symbol, a clarion call for justice that promised to upend a system long corrupted by unchecked authority. It was a turning point that would soon ripple far beyond a single street or a single incident. And, as the city buzzed with heated conversations about reform and accountability, one thing was clear. The seeds of change had been sown, and their harvest would be measured in the restored dignity of every citizen subjected to systemic injustice. Within hours of the arrest, the video of Officer Reynolds's public misconduct, captured vividly by the keen-eyed teenager, exploded online. Social media platforms lit up with the footage, replays, and impassioned commentary from viewers across the nation. The rawness of the encounter, recorded in unfiltered clarity, resonated with countless individuals who had long felt the sting of unchecked authority. Every frame broadcast on screens became a symbol of suppressed truth, and as news outlets began covering the incident, the public's attention shifted from local triviality to a broader debate on systemic abuse. Within minutes of its release, the video had amassed hundreds of thousands of views. Users praised Agent Amelia Thompson's calm dignity under pressure and condemned the officer's overt abuse. The comments ranged from personal testimonials of similar encounters to calls for immediate reform, and many demanded a comprehensive review of policing practices throughout the city. The incident was no longer just a story. It had become a rallying cry for justice, a digital spark that illuminated the dark corners of systemic discrimination and power misuse. As the digital uproar grew, Amelia began receiving messages through encrypted channels. Anonymous texts and emails poured in not only from citizens who had witnessed the event firsthand, but also from individuals who had experienced comparable humiliations at the hands of local law enforcement. One message, written in clear, earnest language by a middle-aged man who described recurring abuses during routine traffic stops, struck a resonant chord with her. Another was a voice note from a young woman detailing an incident where she was verbally berated and detained without due cause during a late-night commute. Each message carried the same undercurrent of betrayal and disbelief, experiences that had long been brushed aside as isolated missteps, but which, when pieced together, painted a picture of a broken system. Realizing the gravity of the emerging pattern, Amelia discreetly forwarded all the collected testimonials, images, and voice recordings to her trusted contacts within the FBI's internal investigation unit. Her every action was measured, balancing the urgency of justice with the stealth required to protect her cover. Behind the scenes, the Bureau began mobilizing resources, forming a specialized task force to not only investigate Reynolds's misconduct but also to comb through historical records and allegations of similar abuses in the precinct. There were whispers among whistleblowers of a decades-long culture of systemic overreach, a culture that had allowed officers like Reynolds to operate with near impunity. Across the internet, public sentiment was evolving into a massive movement. Hashtags, though not used in our narrative, and key phrases like "justice for the people" and "accountability now" dominated online discussions. Influential bloggers and respected voices in civic advocacy shared detailed analyses of the incident, comparing it with past cases and calling for sustained oversight of law enforcement agencies. Editorials in prominent newspapers decried the culture of entitlement that had allowed such abuses to persist and emphasized the urgent need for comprehensive reform. Local community meetings, once quiet and unassuming, found new energy as neighborhood groups organized impromptu gatherings near the scene of the incident. In city halls and town centers, citizens debated how to pressure elected officials to act. Many recalled earlier brushes with authority that they had endured in silence. Now, enriched with concrete evidence and backed by impassioned testimony, the call for change was undeniable. At one such meeting, a respected community elder declared, "This is not just about one officer or one street corner. It's about every citizen whose day-to-day life is marred by the prejudice of those entrusted to protect us." Amelia, while maintaining her cover, knew that her role had unexpectedly shifted from a mere observer to the spearhead of a burgeoning movement. Every document she transmitted to her contacts and every tip that arrived in her inbox tightened the nexus between isolated incidents and systemic abuse. The FBI task force began re-examining officer records, disciplinary reports, and even surveillance footage from other precincts, uncovering a series of harrowing accounts that bore an uncanny resemblance to the Reynolds incident. News conferences rapidly followed. Law enforcement leaders, caught off guard by the scale of the digital rebellion, were forced to issue statements promising swift action and internal reviews. Yet, deep inside, many recognized that the public's appetite for transparency would transcend any official announcement. With each hour that passed, the collective voice of the people grew louder, their scrutiny unyielding. Calls for reforms, from mandatory body cameras to independent oversight committees, are echoing in legislative halls, a clarion call that could reshape the future of policing nationwide. In the midst of this digital storm, Amelia managed to secure a discreet meeting with her informant, a seasoned insider whose evidence could expose further layers of corruption. Even as the nation's gaze shifted toward accountability, she remained steadfast, knowing that the revelations of the day were merely the first chapter in a larger investigation that could redefine justice in a society riddled with inequality. As dusk turned into night, the impact of the viral video was unmistakable. Every news bulletin, every late-night talk show segment, and every friendly debate around dinner tables had been irrevocably altered by what had transpired on that city sidewalk. The digital uprising was not only holding the perpetrator accountable, but was also giving voice to those who had long been silenced by systemic injustice. Amelia's silent resilience, captured on dozens of recording devices, had now become the cornerstone of a movement demanding that no one be subjected to the ridicule and brutality of unchecked authority. The investigation she had helped set in motion promised to bring down walls of silence and impunity, one report at a time. In this new digital age, every exposed injustice became fuel for collective action, and what started as a personal ordeal was transforming into a nationwide crusade for reform. In the weeks following that fateful day on the busy city sidewalk, the incident that began with a single act of humiliation evolved far beyond local headlines. The internal investigation into Officer Reynolds' misconduct and the undeniable evidence captured by witnesses had set off a chain reaction. As more similar cases were uncovered, fueled by countless testimonies and video footage gathered from everyday citizens, the story caught fire. It wasn't long before the local uproar transformed into a national controversy, one that could no longer be ignored by the highest levels of government. A special congressional committee was convened to address systemic abuses in local law enforcement. With mounting public pressure and the guardianship of civil rights organizations behind them, senators from both parties realized that meaningful reform was not just an option. It was an imperative. And among the voices called to testify was Agent Amelia Thompson, whose calm dignity under duress had become a symbol for the millions who had suffered from unchecked power. Summoned to speak before the Senate Subcommittee on Justice and Law Enforcement, Amelia prepared to step into an arena where her personal experience would evolve into a potent force for transformation. The hearing chamber was hushed and somber as Amelia took the stand. Under the austere glow of congressional lights, with a backdrop of American flags and the gravitas of history in every corner, she stood tall. Her eyes, reflecting both the personal scars of that humiliating encounter and the steely resolve that had since fortified her spirit, locked with those of the senators. She began by recounting the events of that day. A routine pedestrian crossing turned into a public display of racial prejudice and abuse of authority, where a single officer's arrogance was laid bare before an unsuspecting public. With measured clarity, she detailed how the confrontation had been documented by numerous eyewitnesses, including a determined teenager whose smartphone footage would later become the cornerstone of the investigation. On that day, Amelia said, her voice steady and unyielding, I was forced to endure a gross display of entitlement and contempt. Every moment of that encounter, from the hostile demands for my identification to the crude remarks laced with racist assumptions, was not only an assault on my dignity as an individual but a stark reminder that systemic injustice often hides behind uniforms and protocols. Her testimony was raw yet precise. As she spoke, she interwove the facts of her personal experience with the broader narrative of abuse, a tale that connected her incident to countless others suffered in quiet despair across the nation. The chamber listened intently as Amelia presented a litany of evidence that included video recordings, official departmental reports, and dozens of testimonials from everyday citizens who had witnessed or experienced similar abuses. A solemn senator from a swing state, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility, asked, Agent Thompson, can you explain how it feels to have your very identity questioned based solely on prejudice? All while you stood there, silent, not because you were weak, but because you had a greater mission? Amelia's response was both measured and passionate. I felt the sting of humiliation, and I felt the weight of every person who has ever been marginalized by an institution meant to protect them. But in that moment, my silence was not a sign of defeat. It was a commitment to the truth. Revealing who I am too soon would have jeopardized an investigation that now stands as proof that these practices are neither isolated incidents nor unfortunate anomalies. They're symptomatic of a broken system, she declared. Her words reverberated through the chamber like a clarion call for accountability. The evidence, meticulously compiled and corroborated by forensic experts, left little doubt that Officer Reynolds' actions were part of a pattern of misconduct that had persisted for far too long in that precinct. As the internal investigation unfolded, it became clear that Reynolds was not the only officer whose behavior merited scrutiny. Documents emerged showing a long history of unchecked abuses, a dark undercurrent that had enabled such behavior to flourish under the guise of authority. Amelia's testimony, once a simple account of personal suffering, had ignited a debate over the very foundation of modern law enforcement practices. Senators debated vigorously behind closed doors that day and in the days to follow. Legislative proposals were drafted that would mandate stricter oversight, independent review boards, and enhanced training programs to eradicate racial prejudice within the force. The public, buoyed by the viral sensation of the video and the authenticity of Amelia's testimony, marched in protest and held vigils in neighborhoods across the nation. Families who had long been reminded of injustice at the hands of those meant to serve and protect saw this congressional hearing as the beginning of an era of accountability. In the wake of the session, media outlets surged with replays of Amelia's stirring words, each broadcast igniting sparks of hope and demands for reform. Citizens, stirred by her fearless candor, flooded community forums, attended town hall meetings, and demanded that local and federal authorities not allow this victory to be fleeting. Activists and well-known public figures alike praised her leadership, citing her testimony as proof that when one stands for justice, their voice can become a beacon for systemic change. As the hearing closed, a final moment of reflective silence descended upon the chamber. A senator summarized the evening by stating, "Today, we witnessed not just the courage of one agent, but the undeniable power of truth to challenge and transform oppressive systems. Let this be the start of a new chapter, one where accountability and dignity prevail." Outside the Capitol, banners and placards expressing hope and demand for reform appeared, and in living rooms across America, people discussed how the events of that day had reshaped their understanding of justice. In that defining hour of legislative reckoning, Agent Amelia Thompson emerged not merely as an undercover operative, but as a national icon. A living testament to the idea that integrity and resilience can force even the most entrenched systems of power to change. Her words echoed far beyond the hall of Congress, reverberating in the hearts of those who had long been silenced by injustice. What happened on this street changed not only the lives of two people, it changed the attitude of an entire city. And this is only the beginning. The path to reform had been set in motion. The bravery of one agent had sparked a movement that promised to reform a system steeped in discrimination and abuse. And with every voice awakened, the march toward true accountability and dignity for all had begun.